When the situation is desperate, you don't send for a diplomat, you send for a monster. That was Admiral Ernest J. King. He didn't care about being liked, and he certainly didn't care about your feelings. In the halls of the Pentagon, he was the most feared man in uniform because his default state was pure, unadulterated rage. President Roosevelt famously joked that King was so tough he literally shaved every morning with a blowtorch. By 1942, King wasn't just an officer. He was the absolute ruler of the United States Navy. He held supreme command over the fighting fleet and the entire industrial machine. But in those early days of the war, the blowtorch admiral was staring at a humiliating defeat. Off the American East Coast, German U-boats were turning the Atlantic into a burning graveyard. This was the second happy time for the Nazis. It was a slaughter. While coastal cities like Miami refused to dim their neon lights for the sake of tourism, merchant tankers were being silhouetted against the glow, becoming perfect, glowing targets for German torpedoes. For months, King's arrogance got in the way. He ignored British advice on convoys and insisted on hunting the subs. He was stubborn, he was losing, and the Atlantic was running red with Allied blood. But King's true genius wasn't his temper. It was his willingness to weaponize pure logic. He realized he couldn't win a game of hide-and-seek with old ships. He had to turn the entire ocean into a data set. To do this, he authorized the 10th Fleet. This wasn't a fleet of steel, it was a fleet of minds. It was a ghost command tucked away in a Washington basement, filled not with sailors, but with mathematicians and physicists from MIT. King gave these scientists the power to override any captain at sea. He was no longer just fighting a naval war, he was launching the first ever algorithmic campaign in human history. The basement admirals crunched the numbers of survival. They analyzed every single sinking and discovered a mathematical truth that shattered naval tradition. They proved that a massive convoy was statistically safer than a small one. While the old guard thought small and fast was the key, the math proved that huge and shielded was the only way to win. They used early mechanical computers to tear apart the four-rotor Enigma code, finding the logic in the Nazi movements that no human eyes could see. By May 1943, the trap was set. King's new hunter-killer groups didn't wait to be found. They used radio fingerprints to predict exactly where a U-boat would surface to recharge its batteries. They were no longer reacting, they were predicting. The result was Black May. In only 30 days, 41 German U-boats were sent to the bottom of the Atlantic. The loss was so total that the German commander, Karl Donitz, admitted the battle was over. The hunter had officially become the prey. Ernest King was a man who fought everyone, the Army, the British, and his own staff. He was the most hated man in the military, but he was the only one who realized that in the 20th century, the best weapon wasn't a bigger gun, it was a faster calculation. He grew the Navy from 700 ships to a staggering 6,000, but his real legacy was the basement. He proved that in modern war, the side with the best data wins, and everyone else is just a target. The generals said he was reckless, the Allies said he was impossible, but the statistics said he was the only one who knew how to finish the job. We didn't need a hero to save the Atlantic, we needed a man mean enough to let the math do the killing. But the Atlantic was only half the map, and King's appetite for destruction was global. While the 10th Fleet bled the U-boats dry, King turned his predatory gaze toward the Pacific, a theater he considered his personal chessboard. He didn't just want to defeat the Imperial Japanese Navy, he wanted to erase their ability to exist as a modern power. To King, the vast blue expanse wasn't a battlefield, it was a logistical furnace where he would smelt a new world order. He bypassed the traditional island-hopping strategy whenever it suited his math, starving Japanese garrisons into literal ghosts. He demanded a pace of production that defied human physics, turning the American Midwest into a conveyor belt of steel that birthed a new aircraft carrier every month. His logistics of agony ensured that by 1944, every Japanese sailor was looking at a horizon filled with more American guns than there were shells in his own magazine. King's cruelty was his greatest asset. He fired admirals for a single moment of hesitation and bullied the Joint Chiefs until they bled. He knew that history doesn't remember the nice guys, it remembers the ones who stayed standing. When the smoke finally cleared over Tokyo Bay, the blowtorch admiral didn't smile. He simply looked at the data, saw that the variables had been neutralized, and turned his back on the ruins. He had transformed the U.S. Navy into a god of the machine age, a cold, calculating predator that didn't just win wars, but ended them with the clinical precision of a guillotine.